I will be summing up for our side. Now, as my colleague said, Parliament already voted to defer the decision to the people of the country. Now, if Parliament is going to, as they say, vote on Article 50, what on earth can they vote on? They have already given the decision to a referendum. The referendum has a result, so Parliament has effectively already voted on it. The only vote that they can come up to is, yes, we are going to invoke Article 50 because that's what we said we would do when we gave the decision to the people. So there's not a lot of room for Parliament to decide on whether or not Article 50 will be invoked. The only thing they can do, as my colleague said, is delay it. Now, on the single market, several people said that I hadn't made the case against the single market, or I hadn't made the case for leaving the single market. That's true. That's not the case I was making. The case I was making is that since the country has voted to leave, that the single market should not be the top priority, especially since trade with the rest of the world is getting bigger as trade with the EU is getting smaller. That's not a case for saying the single market's bad. It's not a case for saying we should leave it. But because that is then leverage that the other 27 nations can hold against Britain, if Britain prioritizes remaining in the single market above all, then that will be detrimental to Britain's interests in trying to come to some kind of trading arrangement. As even the proposition said, worst comes to worst, we can trade on WTO terms. And I'd like now to finish on the idea of the WTO. The problem with the European Union is it's outdated. Ever since the 1930s, since after the stock market crash, when countries went protectionist, when countries were seeking autarky and total control, countries have distrusted each other. After the war, 6 countries of Europe decided to group together for that kind of trade. The WTO didn't exist then. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades didn't exist then. That body, the WTO, makes regulations that the EU then has to implement. So what Britain ought to do is focus on getting its seat back in the WTO. Right now, when the WTO meets, the British representative is shown the door. All right. When Britain leaves the single market, when Britain leaves the EU, it can regain that seat and focus on representing its trade interests through the WTO, which is more important because they set the rules that Brussels has to implement anyway regarding trade. Regarding trade, not Interpol, we're not talking about that, but regarding trade in the single market.